My name is Alex Carter. I'm 35, a software engineer, and I've been working at this company for over a decade. I built most of its infrastructure from the ground up. I've poured blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights into creating the systems that power everything we do here. It wasn't always easy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. But then Leo walked in. I remember the day he started as our new CTO like it was yesterday. We'd all heard the rumors, a dynamic leader, a guy who was going to bring change and innovation. The whole company was buzzing about him, especially the upper management. You could practically see the sparks flying between them and Leo's polished resume. He walked in with his slick suit and that smile, the kind that made you feel like he already knew all your secrets. His handshake was firm, but his eyes, they were calculating, like he was sizing me up the second we met. I've seen people like him before, people who talk a big game but don't have a clue about what really makes a company work. People who thrive on corporate buzzwords like optimization, agility, and innovation, but are terrified to get their hands dirty. Alex, right? Leo asked, flashing a smile as he leaned against the door frame of my office. I've heard a lot about you. I've been looking at the system you built. It's, adorable. Adorable? I blinked. I wasn't sure if I had heard him correctly. I'd spent the last 5 years designing, tweaking, and perfecting the system that kept this place running, and he thought it was adorable? Thanks, I said, forcing a smile that I didn't feel. I tried to hide the annoyance building in my chest, but I couldn't. Leo shrugged like it was no big deal, then launched into his corporate spiel. We're going to make some changes around here. Optimize things, modernize processes. Gotta keep up with the times, right? I wanted to tell him to back off, to respect the systems that had kept the company afloat long before he'd walked in with his fancy jargon. But instead, I nodded, keeping my voice even. I've been optimizing things for years. If you need any context on how things work, I'm happy to fill you in. But I knew, deep down, it wouldn't matter. Leo wasn't here to understand the systems that had worked. He was here to change things, even if he had no idea what he was doing, and I was certain of one thing. He wasn't going to ask for my input. The next few weeks confirmed that. Leo was everywhere, sitting in meetings, taking credit for everything, and tossing around new ideas like they were revolutionary. Meanwhile, my work, the stuff that kept everything running smoothly, was being pushed to the background. Every time I brought up a concern or suggested an improvement, Leo would wave it off with a dismissive grin, calling it legacy tech that was holding the company back. He'd talk about how we needed to be more agile, more modern, more innovative. But every change he implemented only made things worse. He renamed the systems I had built, slapped a shiny new label on them, and called them innovations, even though they were clunky and inefficient. He brought in expensive, flashy tools that barely worked, just to stay on trend. And slowly, I began to see what he was really doing. He wasn't interested in improving things. He was interested in erasing everything that I had worked for, all in the name of making himself look good. I knew where this was headed, and it wasn't pretty, but I stayed calm, knowing my worth. I had spent years building this company's backbone, and no matter how many changes Leo tried to make, the company would eventually fall back on the systems I had created. But Leo wasn't going to make this easy. I could feel it. This was the beginning of a battle, and I was ready to fight back. Patience was key, and I had all the time in the world to watch his decisions implode. I just had to bide my time. It started with small things, almost imperceptible at first, like a shift in the air. Leo began renaming systems, my systems, calling them new initiatives, as if the years of careful work I'd poured into them had simply vanished overnight. The internal tools I built and optimized over the last decade, which were used by hundreds of employees every day, were now rebranded as something different. Leo had taken them and slapped his own labels on them. Agility tools, he called them, next-gen frameworks. It wasn't the names that bothered me. It was the fact that everything I'd built, everything that made this company function, was suddenly being overshadowed by Leo's flashy promises of better performance and cutting-edge technology. He started cutting important processes too. Things that kept our systems stable were suddenly deemed legacy code, as if they were nothing more than outdated relics, unworthy of the company's future. Leo would smile and say, "We'll optimize these. Don't worry, trust me, it's better this way." And I could feel my work slipping away under his glossy smile and corporate jargon. One morning, I walked into a meeting only to find Leo presenting a shiny new AI tool. It had cost the company a fortune. When I dug into it later, I discovered it didn't solve any of the problems it was meant to address. It only added new layers of complexity, slowing things down and creating more work for the team. But Leo, he kept talking about optimization, agility, and cutting-edge solutions. I stayed quiet. I knew arguing wouldn't do any good. It was becoming increasingly clear that Leo didn't value the systems I had carefully built. He was too busy trying to stamp his mark on everything, to make it look like he was bringing something new, even if it meant breaking what already worked. As the weeks passed, my role at the company shrank. I found myself excluded from key meetings, left out of discussions that directly impacted the systems I had designed. I used to be the one people came to when they had questions or needed guidance. Now, I was just a ghost in the background. Junior engineers, eager to impress Leo, were handed projects I had originally designed, as if my contributions were a thing of the past. I watched with growing frustration as these junior engineers, bright but inexperienced, floundered. They were handed a system they didn't understand and were told to make changes without knowing the reasoning behind the original design. The whole team started to feel it. There were more bugs, more errors, and more confusion. Some of the engineers came to me privately, unsure about the new tools and processes they were being forced to use. They asked questions, hesitant but eager for answers, and I couldn't help but sympathize with them. Leo's so-called innovations were quickly starting to unravel, but I didn't let it show. I didn't snap at Leo, didn't openly challenge him. I knew that wasn't the way to fight this battle. Instead, I quietly kept track of every change he made, every system he broke, and every decision that would eventually come back to haunt him. I was patient, watching as Leo's vision crumbled. In time, the cracks would show. I knew it, and I was ready. I just had to wait. I wasn't expecting to find anything when I went digging through the old HR archives. It was just routine, a bit of paperwork I needed to clear up in my own mind. I had a few spare moments between my regular work and the endless string of emails from Leo's new optimizations. So I decided to kill some time by flipping through old contracts. And then I stumbled upon it, the contract that I had signed nearly 10 years ago, when I first joined the company, a relic of my early days here, when things were simpler and I didn't have to worry about Leo or corporate games. The contract had been buried in the back of the folder, likely forgotten by most, but it was exactly what I needed. I skimmed over the usual terms: salary, benefits, expectations. Then, I found it. Clause 14.2, Intellectual Property Rights. The words seemed to jump off the page at me. In the event of termination without proper notice, the employee retains full intellectual property rights to any systems or tools developed during the course of employment. It was there, in black and white, my protection, my safety net. I froze for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. I hadn't thought about that clause in years. When I'd first signed it, it had been a precaution, something my ex-husband, who was a lawyer at the time, had insisted on. Just in case, he'd said, if anything goes wrong, you'll have something to fall back on. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes, thinking it was just a lawyer's overprotectiveness. But now, as Leo systematically undermined everything I had built, I realized that this clause could be my weapon. A quiet, determined resolve settled in my chest. I wasn't about to let Leo rewrite the history of this company, especially not after everything I had contributed. The thought of using that clause felt like a lifeline. It wasn't just about protecting my work. It was about control, about reclaiming what was mine. I knew Leo would push me out sooner or later. He was already starting to exclude me from meetings and sideline me. But he wouldn't be able to take everything without consequences, not if I had anything to say about it. I started mentally preparing my plan. I'd have to be smart about this, patient. Leo's dismissal was inevitable, but I could fight back. This clause would give me the leverage I needed to make him and the company pay for what they were doing. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle into place. Leo might be ready to erase me, but I wasn't going down without a fight. For a while, I thought maybe things would settle. Leo had pushed his changes through, rebranding and reworking the systems I had built. But the more time passed, the more I realized his approach wasn't sustainable. The system was buckling under the weight of his flashy innovations, but he wasn't one to admit mistakes. Instead, he pushed forward, getting more aggressive in his campaign to rewrite the company's history as his own. I stayed in the background, as if I had no say in any of it. I was still the one with the knowledge of how everything worked, yet I was being sidelined, excluded from meetings, and barely consulted on any important decisions. It didn't take long for me to see the cracks forming in Leo's grand vision. Junior engineers were starting to get lost in the new systems that were overcomplicated, inefficient, and outright flawed. Despite it all, I stayed calm. I kept my mouth shut, but I made sure to record everything, every email, every meeting, every change Leo made to my codebase. If I was going to be pushed out, I wasn't going to go down quietly. Leo could dismiss my contributions, but he couldn't erase them, and every change he made, every mistake he and his new team would inevitably make, would be something I could trace back to him. I kept track of it all, every conversation we had, every decision that seemed questionable. It was a kind of insurance. If the time ever came, and I knew it would, I'd be ready. It wasn't just about protecting my work anymore. It was about taking control back. I had all the patience in the world, and I knew that eventually, Leo's shiny new systems would start to unravel, and when they did, I'd be ready to strike. At the same time, Leo grew bolder. I could see it in the way he carried himself. He had a certain swagger now, like he was untouchable, as if he had already rewritten the company's success story, even though his so-called innovations were hanging by a thread. I wasn't foolish enough to believe that he was as secure as he seemed. Eventually, the problems he was creating would become impossible to ignore. And when that day came, I would be in the perfect position to make my move. I didn't know when Leo would finally make his play. He was pushing me out slowly, subtly, with every passing day. But I knew it was coming. I just had to be ready when it did. For now, I watched, and I waited. It was a Friday morning when Leo finally made his move. I had been expecting it. The meetings I'd been excluded from. The way Leo slowly started taking over everything, from minor details to entire projects. He was slowly but surely pushing me out, trying to erase my contributions. But I had been patient, keeping my cool, letting him think he was in control. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through some code, when the Zoom notification popped up on my screen. The meeting was scheduled without warning. My heart rate quickened, but I kept my face neutral. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for. I clicked the link and entered the call. Leo appeared on the screen, smiling like he had just won some victory, even though I could feel the tension in the air. "Hey Alex," he said casually, his tone as smooth as ever. "I wanted to talk to you about some changes moving forward." I nodded, my hands folding neatly in my lap, betraying no hint of the fury building inside me. "I'm listening." Leo leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands behind his head. "So here's the thing, we've been looking at the direction of the company, and it's clear we need to move away from some of the old systems. You know, the legacy stuff. You've done some great work, really, but we need to streamline things, move faster, innovate. I think you understand." I bit my lip, the audacity. He wasn't even trying to soften the blow anymore. "We've decided to move forward without you," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Your ideas have been great, but it's time for them to be sunsetted. You'll always be remembered for laying the groundwork here, but the future is about new, agile systems. Your expertise is appreciated, but we're going in a different direction." I stayed silent, letting his words sink in. He hadn't even mentioned anything about formal notice or paperwork. No respect, no process. Just a casual announcement like he was firing an intern. "Don't worry," Leo continued, the same smug smile plastered on his face. "Your contributions will live on in the company's future. We'll make sure that the legacy is there. But this is just part of the natural evolution, right?" He looked at me as if he expected me to nod along with him, as if everything he had just said made sense. I couldn't help the disdain that bubbled up inside me. but I didn't show it. Not yet. I kept my face neutral, my eyes locked on his. Understood, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'll make sure the transition is smooth. Leo laughed, apparently relieved. Good, that's what I like to hear. I'm sure we'll figure out the details. Thanks for everything, Alex. Minutes later, before I could even leave the call, he sent a casual Slack message to confirm my firing. Hey, just wanted to officially let you know that we've moved forward. You've been a great part of the team, but we're excited for what comes next. I sat there for a moment, staring at the message, taking a deep breath. A ridiculous, almost laughable sense of calm washed over me. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I stood up from my desk, took a deep breath, and walked away from my computer. I knew what I had to do next. It had only been a few days since Leo's Zoom call, the one where he so casually fired me. And yet, I already felt more at ease than I had in months. The weight of that call, the dismissal of my entire career in a few hollow words, had been hard to bear at first. But now, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how perfectly everything was falling into place. I wasn't fired out of incompetence or a lack of contribution. No, I was fired because Leo couldn't tolerate anyone else taking credit for the systems that had built this company. His plan was clear: erase the past, claim the future. But Leo had underestimated one thing. I knew exactly how to fight back. I reached out to my ex-husband, a lawyer who had always been my go-to for any legal matters, no matter how small. I still had the contract I'd signed all those years ago, and I knew Clause 14.2 would be my ticket to take control. I explained the situation to him, how Leo had fired me with no formal process and no paperwork, how my work was being dismissed as legacy, and how Leo was pushing forward with his own vision. It's all there, Alex, my ex-husband said after reviewing the clause. This is cut and dry. You have the right to your intellectual property. If they continue using it, they'll owe you, and a lot more than they probably expect. A surge of relief washed over me. I had the upper hand now, and it felt good. Armed with my legal knowledge, I spent the next couple of days preparing the necessary documents: a cease and desist letter, an invoice for damages, and a licensing agreement for the intellectual property they had been using without my consent. I didn't waste any time. The moment the paperwork was finalized, I sent everything to the new CEO, Leo's replacement. I didn't expect much from him. He was already caught in the middle of Leo's wreckage, but I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for myself. The message I sent was clear. If they wanted to continue using my code, they'd need to pay up. If they didn't want to comply, I was more than ready to take further legal action. I also made sure to calculate the damages precisely. Every minute of their optimization and every change made to the code without my consent added up. As soon as the email was sent, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. Justice was slowly being served, and the company was already scrambling. It wouldn't take long before they realized just how valuable my work had been, and how much they stood to lose without it. Despite the quiet satisfaction I felt in the aftermath of sending the cease and desist letter and invoice, Leo continued his push for a product launch. He was undeterred, pushing forward with the company's plans as if everything was business as usual. But I knew better. It didn't take long for cracks to show. Leo's so-called innovations were falling apart. The flashy AI tools he had brought in to optimize the system had created more bugs than they fixed. Processes that once ran smoothly were now bogged down with new issues: security flaws, crashes, slowdowns. The problems were mounting, and with each passing day, more of the team started to notice. But Leo, as always, was quick to dismiss the issues. He wasn't worried. His head was still in the clouds, focused on the shiny new product launch he had promised would change everything. But as the internal systems began to falter, whispers spread. Junior engineers, once enthusiastic about the so-called new direction, were now questioning the very decisions Leo had made. Some of them reached out to me, not directly. Of course, they couldn't risk Leo's wrath. But there were telltale signs, subtle, back-channel messages asking about the old systems, and quiet murmurs of doubt. I was patient, watching from the sidelines as the company slowly spiraled into chaos. Leo's credibility was beginning to crumble. Investors who had once been captivated by his promises of innovation now started to ask questions. They began noticing the technical issues piling up, the security flaws, the bugs. Some of them were quietly reaching out to me, seeking guidance, wondering what had really gone wrong. It was only a matter of time before Leo's reputation fell apart, and I would be there, waiting. The media didn't catch on immediately, but the more technical issues piled up, the harder it became for Leo to keep up the illusion of control. Word of the internal problems began leaking. Rumors of an intellectual property dispute with me started to surface. People in the industry, former colleagues, and employees reached out to me, offering support and sharing their concerns about Leo's leadership. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to make a public statement or dig into the situation. The cracks were already spreading, and Leo was sinking deeper with every failed launch and every security breach. I savored my control, knowing that the day would soon come when Leo's bubble would burst, and I would be there to pick up the pieces on my terms. But for now, I let the chaos unfold. I stayed quiet, knowing that soon enough, the truth would come out, and when it did, I'd be ready. The phone call came when I least expected it, a Saturday morning, when I was knee-deep in preparing for the next phase of my plan. I was sipping coffee at my kitchen table, organizing the legal documents that had been sent to the new CEO, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew it wasn't just another cold call. I could feel the weight of it. With a deep breath, I answered. "Alex Carter?" The voice on the other end was professional, calm, but there was an undertone I recognized. It was an investor from the company. "This is Alex. How can I help you?" I kept my voice neutral, not betraying the satisfaction I was beginning to feel as Leo's house of cards started to collapse. "Hi, Alex. My name is Daniel, and I'm an investor in the company. I wanted to personally reach out to you, acknowledge your contributions, and apologize for the way things have unfolded recently." For a moment, I sat still, digesting the words. Apologize? It was almost laughable. They'd treated me like a cog in the machine, until now, when everything Leo had done started to crumble under its own weight. "I appreciate the apology," I said, carefully choosing my words. "But it's a little late for that, don't you think? Leo's decisions have already done their damage." Daniel's tone shifted, the urgency now clear. "You're absolutely right. Look, I won't mince words. Leo's leadership is failing. The product launch has hit major snags, and we're seeing the fallout from his decisions. We need someone who understands the company's foundation, and frankly, who knows what's actually working here." I listened, and a quiet sense of satisfaction spread through me. He wasn't offering me an apology anymore. He was recognizing my value. That was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough. "I'm glad you see that," I said, my voice steady. "But if you think I'm coming back under the same conditions, you're mistaken." There was a slight pause on the other end before Daniel replied, his tone softer, more conciliatory. "I completely understand. That's why I wanted to offer you something. We'd like to bring you back as Chief Product Strategist, with full control over future projects. We want your expertise, Alex. We want to correct what went wrong, and we need you to help lead us there." The offer hung in the air, and I felt the weight of it settle in. Leo had wanted to take credit for everything, to erase the contributions of the past to make room for his own, and now, here was this investor, admitting the company's failure and offering me a seat at the table. But as flattering as it was, I wasn't ready to jump back in just yet. I knew my worth now, more than ever before. This wasn't about regaining control for a few more years at a desk job. This was about ensuring my future, my code, and my legacy were protected. "I'm glad you're offering control," I said, my voice cool. "But I want more than just control over future projects. I want full ownership over the work I've already done. I want to make sure the company can't use my intellectual property without paying me for it." There was a brief silence, followed by a sharp exhale. Daniel clearly wasn't expecting this. I see. You want compensation for the intellectual property." I wasn't done. "And not just compensation. I want the company to sign over full control to me, not just for the work they've already used, but for anything that touches it in the future. I want veto power. If they want to use my code again, they'll pay for it, and I'll have a say in how it's implemented." It was a bold move, but I could tell by the silence on the other end that he knew this was a deal breaker. Finally, Daniel spoke. "All right, I think we can come to terms. I'll start the process to get everything in writing." I felt a rush of satisfaction. It wasn't just the acknowledgement of my value, it was the validation of everything I had fought for. Leo's grip on the company was loosening, and now I was the one holding the power. "Great," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I look forward to finalizing the details." As I hung up, a sense of finality washed over me. I hadn't just regained my place in the company, I had secured my future and my intellectual property. I had won. The dust had settled. After weeks of legal back and forth and tense negotiations, everything was finally in place. The contracts were signed, the terms agreed upon, and the company, under new leadership, was now forced to respect the work I had created. I wasn't returning as an employee. No, that ship had sailed. Instead, I had secured a much more powerful position for myself, as a private consultant. I'd negotiated full veto power over anything that touched my intellectual property, ensuring that Leo's disastrous legacy would never again come close to altering what I had built. My influence in the company now reached far beyond what it had ever been when I was just a regular engineer. I had control over the future, control over my work, and most importantly, control over how this company would use my systems from here on out. Walking into the company's new office was surreal. The space hadn't changed much, but the energy was different. Leo's absence was palpable. There were whispers of his failed leadership, the chaos he left behind, and the systems he tried to implement. But no one dared to say much to me directly. They all knew. His departure had been quiet, swift, and final. The board members, the investors. They all knew that Leo had pushed things too far, and now the company had to deal with the consequences. When I arrived, I was greeted by the new CEO, who was eager to make things right. But the satisfaction I felt was not in the apology. It was in knowing that I now controlled what had been taken from me. As we sat down at the table, I could feel the weight of my decisions settling in. "Alex, we're grateful for your willingness to come back," the CEO said, looking at me with a mix of respect and relief. "We've learned a lot from the missteps, and we're ready to follow your lead." I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had made sure of that. "I'm not here to fix Leo's mess. I'm here to ensure it doesn't happen again," I said, my voice steady, almost cold. "And if you want the company to succeed, you'll respect the systems that work. My code is not up for grabs, and I have full veto power over any future developments that touch it." The CEO nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. He'd heard the stories, seen the fallout, and he knew that my work was the lifeblood of this company. He wasn't about to challenge me. I spent the next few weeks meeting with the development teams, getting a feel for the damage Leo had caused. It was more significant than I had initially thought. Bigger bugs, deeper flaws, but nothing I couldn't fix, and fix it, I did. Each day, I took control of the product, making the necessary changes, steering it back to the course I had originally set. The company was slowly but surely starting to find its rhythm again, and Leo, his role in the company's history was quietly erased, as if he had never been there. He had become nothing more than a footnote, a failed experiment in leadership. I didn't need to rub it in anyone's face. The results spoke for themselves. One afternoon, as I sat in the boardroom with the senior executives, it hit me. This was my victory, not just in terms of reclaiming control, but in finally seeing my value recognized. I wasn't just the engineer in the background anymore. I was the one shaping the future. I was the one with the power. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control of my destiny, and that feeling, it was worth every minute of the fight.